What's happening? This is Brian Fair from Shadows Fall, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 217 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I have the honor and the privilege to speak with Brian Fair from Shadows Motherfucking Goddamn Fall. How you doing today, Brian?
There we go. See, you knew our full name, so now
Yeah,
I already know we're off to a good start. That is technically our full name, Shadows Motherfucking Goddamn Fall. So I got to say it all.
yeah. I decided I wanted to show my enthusiasm and sort of hype up this interview.
Nice. It's funny that whole thing started. We had just toured with Machine Head and then Five Finger Death Punch, and they both had like chants, like the Machine fucking Head and then the Five Finger Death Punch, and we're like, all right, let's invent the most monosyllabic, obnoxious chant we could think of. So I think we were like walking the streets in like Australia or somewhere. Me and John just started doing that, and then it stuck, and then it was over.
Nice. That's great, man. Man, so kind of like the format is, I want to do like a rundown of your discography and talk about like your musical history. So take me back to young Brian Fair. So kind of growing up, what were the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to be a vocalist?
I got into metal pretty early on through like a cool older neighbor and like a cool older brother. So I think the first two records I ever bought with my own money were Blizzard of Oz by Ozzy on the same day as work, business as usual. So, I covered my metal and my pop uh, spectrum right in one. So Ozzy was definitely, a big influence right out of the gates. And that sort of led to like a lot of the classic metal, like Maiden. And it's funny, I was a huge Paul Diano fan because I heard Killers before I heard any of the Bruce stuff. And so I was way into the first two Maiden records. And then, but then when I heard Wasted Years, that got me into the whole, Bruce Dickinson era Maiden. From there, kind of stumbled into thrash metal as things just, were getting heavier. So, all the classics, Anthrax and Testament, huge influences. Chuck Billy's voice was always to me like that mix of aggression, like it was tough, but like it had melody,
Yeah.
so he kind of was able to do both of those things. So I always loved that. And from there, honestly, through skateboarding, I got into like punk and hardcore pretty early, where I started going to like hardcore shows when I was like 14 or 15 years old, going to see local shows in Boston, in the Boston area. So yeah, it was kind of crazy as like a little kid to be in the Boston hardcore scene at that age, and that led right into band. So yeah, it was it was a whirlwind, man. But yeah, I was just like that skate rat kid who listened to thrash metal and all the crossover stuff like DRI and Cro-Mags, and then got into super into hardcore, and then here we are.
Yeah. The cool thing I heard, like, because I think it was on your Wikipedia, which is a good source, but it said in seventh grade you had your first visit to a recording studio after you and two friends won a radio jingle contest sponsored by Mass Electric with a
Yeah.
Beastie Boys inspired tune, the Energy Conversation rap song. I'm always curious about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, energy conservation rap, man. It was like basically a Casio keyboard, like set like beat, and you could hit this little film. So it like on every four, it'd just be like, and then right back into the beat. So me and some friends just recorded that on the boombox and wrote like very like License to Ill era Beastie Boys style like rap, but like cleaned up because it was for an energy conservation thing. So yeah, it was about like turning off your lights when you leave the room, and trying to turn
Kind of
down the
like a
heat
good
and stuff to
PSA.
stay. Yeah, it was totally what it was for. So they ran it on probably a few like local radio stations, probably once or twice. So, but it was funny. Yeah, we were in a full-on recording studio with sick mics and all that, and then we like plug in our tiny little Casio, into like
Yeah.
a little quarter-inch jack and just like hit the button. So yeah, so that was the first true experience. Then after that, it was like all about 4-track demos with like local bands I was in, and then Overcast. I think the first thing we recorded was on a 4-track demo in our drummer's uh, living room and stuff like that. So yeah, so after it was a downhill set after the energy conservation rap of like the big time studio back to the basement recordings.
Yeah. That's great, man. So I think kind of like going in order, I believe your first band was called Frenzy, which was a high school band where apparently you play bass and
Yeah,
sang. I'm always
yeah,
digging deep. Like nobody ever
yeah.
talks about this.
Yeah, well, that was like, yeah, that was middle school, honestly. Yeah, I think we lasted maybe freshman year, but yeah, that started in middle school. And we were like mostly doing kind a mix of like Sex Pistol style punk rock, but with a lot of like Skid Row and like Wasp, sort of influences too. Because the dude who wrote the songs, he was like way into like, more of the glammy metal stuff, and a few of us were more into the kind of Jane's Addiction and Sex Pistol stuff. So it was real punky rock. But we would, we had a bunch of originals, but we also did covers, like everything from like, like I said, like we did Skid Row cover, but then we also did Sex Pistols cover, and then even I think we even did awful Jimi Hendrix cover. But yeah, that was like the first kind of real band, but it was just for fun, playing like little shows and battles of the bands and stuff like that. So
Yeah. And then right before Overcast, I thought this was interesting. You were in a group called Late Night Crew, which is a Motley Crue cover band, which was kind of like a one-time thing with some of the dudes from Unearth. How did that come to be?
yeah, that was just dude, that was just a one-time train wreck, is what that was. Derek, who was playing drums with Unearth at the time, he was also in that band Seamless with Jesse from Killswitch. And this was later on though. Like he just was like, we're playing a Seamless record release party. We want to do something fun afterwards. Ken from Unearth and Buzz were like, yeah, we're gonna learn a bunch of Crue songs. Derek's like, yeah, well, we never practiced. I think they may have jammed once. And so we just drank a ton and hacked our way through like Motley Crue covers like terribly. So that it was a blast, but I don't remember much of it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then how did you form Overcast? Because I know they formed it in 91. It was like you and Mike D from Killswitch.
yep, yeah. Basically, Mike D was a couple years older than me, and we met like skating like a local ramp, and started talking about music. And he was going to see Leeway, this New York hardcore band, was playing the Channel in Boston with a bunch of other Boston bands. And I was like, oh man, I'd love to go. I just read about Leeway's demo and like the latest Thrasher or something like that. So I was all in. And from that show, we started talking about, maybe starting a band. He had been in a band, a couple bands. The last one before Overcast was called Nice Try, and he had a few riffs. So I knew a drummer. The drummer for Frenzy was like, wanted to do something like that. So we started jamming. And yeah, that was 90, 91, and we were like, yeah, I think Mike was the only one with a license. Like we were all under 16 besides him. And we started writing like really Cro-Magsy, early Metallica kind of sound and stuff. And then it got a lot more like intricate and darker and a little more like heavy as time went on. But yeah, we started just wanting to be like a crossover hardcore like metal band, and it kind of started getting a little more metal and a little more weird and eerie, and kind of just evolved from there.
Yeah. And then I guess you're playing locally around Massachusetts. And then I believe you got signed to your first like local label called Exchange Records that put out the first EP, Bleed Into One. How did they find Overcast?
Yeah, it was just basically one guy, Mike Exchange. We were playing shows, just local hardcore shows, playing around. Might have gotten to like Connecticut and New Hampshire and stuff like that, but mostly New England. And he was at a few shows. He was putting out a couple 7-inches and just asked us if we wanted to do that. So we recorded a few songs, and he put that out. And yeah, that was our kind of first release. Yeah, it was cool to get something actually on vinyl and have an actual release. Then from there, that led to a couple folks with Edison Records, who were out of Philly, and he used to run a distribution called Very Distribution, and they were a lot of people's lifeline for like records you couldn't find at record stores. So he was an awesome dude to be able to work with, and he really helped Overcast's name kind of get a little more nationwide through but it was still a really small metalcore hardcore scene then. It was the shows were small and fun, but it was a tight knit network. So he really helped us kind of get our name out there, and that allowed us to kind of travel a little more and play outside of New England, do some touring. So
Awesome. And it's something to note about the EP. It said like the original press was like 500 copies, which was agreed upon between the label and you guys. And then it pretty much sold out within a year. And then the label pressed a second batch, assuming that you all would be happy about it. And I heard that you all were like pissed and were not like told about it prior to the repressing.
yeah. Well, that was the day and age of that stuff. Is like, yeah, there wasn't contracts, there wasn't anything. So I wouldn't even say pissed. Like all of a sudden there was like a lot more records out, and we didn't have any, So, but that was classic for hardcore stuff back then. You would go to shows and people would bootleg your own demo at the show, and sell it. So that was just par for course back then. But it was one good thing about coming up in a scene like that is you had to learn how to do a lot of stuff yourself, learn how to put out records, how to distribute records, how to promote records. So learning all that stuff in the early days, even through things going wrong prepared you a lot for the future, you know?
Yeah. And then going into like the debut full-length album, Expectational Dilution, I thought that was a good debut full-length album. So what was the thought process going into making the debut full-length Overcast album?
Yeah, man, those songs had kind of been kicking around for a little while, and we had a couple demo versions of a lot of that stuff. And yeah, we got to go up to the studio in New Hampshire. I think it was in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and it was like a place we could afford, but was like dudes who knew what they were doing and had some decent gear, especially for the time. You know, things were a lot more primitive then, for sure, but it was. But we recorded it like kind of the way we played live, where we just banged out the guitars and drums and bass at the same time, and then I went back and just overdid vocals. So it was a pretty quick and like raw kind of approach to recording. I thought that captured like where we were at as a band then, and that was the beginning of the real Overcast sound. Was that record? You know, I think that's when we kind of knew more what we wanted to sound like, and kind of creating the music we always wanted to hear, as opposed to just kind of being real obviously influenced by stuff. So yeah, that record, and it's still, people still dig those tunes today, which is crazy, that stuff written by a bunch of teenagers, you know, almost like 30 years ago at this point,
Yeah.
that people still dig it. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, next year will be the 30-year anniversary. I mean,
30 year, it's
I was
yeah.
only 4 months old when that album came out. Now,
Nice.
do you have like a certain like feeling about it now as opposed to when you put it out almost 30 years ago?
To me, yeah, like listening back, like man, I sound so young to myself. Like I hear my voice and I'm just like, whoa, like that's a kid. You know, like the other thing is I used to write beats. Well, Mike wrote a lot of lyrics as well, but we wrote way too many syllables. It was like and shit, and you could tell you're young and you know, like just have a lot to say or just don't know when to shut up. You know, so trying to say, like we've done some reunion shows and trying to sing those songs, you know, 30 years later, can take a lot out of you.
All right. All right. And then going into the next album, Fight Ambition to Kill, I thought that was a great follow-up to Expectational Dilution. So what was that like going from that to Fight?
Yeah, that one was a legit jump in studio quality, where we went into a legendary studio in Boston, excuse me, and got, that was our Fort Apache. Has recorded some huge rock records through the years, and that was our first time in a full-on pro crazy studio. Again, because of that, we had to record super fast because we couldn't afford that stuff like the way the, you know, some other projects could. Those are the, you know, the budgets on that stuff were just hundreds as opposed to like tens of thousands of dollars, you know. So we went in and banged it out, but we got a chance to do a little more sonically with overdubs and all that, which didn't leave me much time to do vocals. I had to record everything in like I think 2 or 3 days, like all the tracks, and I double everything. So it was like each song twice basically in like a day and a half, 2 days. Um, but we got to do a lot more with samples and noise tracks and all that fun stuff that we always wanted to do. We were a huge fan of like Neurosis and bands like Buzz Oven, who use a lot of feedback and layers of just like static and weird samples. So that was our first time to really push that. We did a little of that on Expectational Dilution, but we got to really get into it on Fight Ambition to Kill.
Yeah. Then you started like playing locally around New England, and then of course in '98 like Overcast broke up. So how hard was it for you guys to call it quits at that time?
You know, it was pretty tough, but we had just done a tour, like a full US tour with Shai Hulud, Disembodied, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work, and we were broke as shit. And you know, we were just, a lot of us were just graduating college. We'd been in Overcast at this point now for like 8 years or so, 7, 8 years. So it just felt like some of the guys were kind of burnt out on it. And once anyone was going to leave, especially like our drummer Jason was talking about not wanting to do it anymore, and he was such a huge part of our sound that we weren't going to even look for a replacement. Like if anyone was going to walk away, we probably were going to call it quits. And so yeah, we, you know, played kind of a last show in Connecticut, and then that was it. And pretty much right away from there, Matt, who we knew, like we used to, when, before I was in Shadows Fall, we used to take Overcast used to take them out on shows and on tour, so we knew each other well. So I was approached by them pretty quickly after that, and Mike D started Killswitch with Adam D pretty quick after that too. So right when Overcast split, we sort of me and Mike both knew we wanted to do music, and we'd even talked about doing some stuff together. But then we're like, it'll just be Overcast Part 2, you know. So,
Yeah.
which ended up happening years later in Death Ray. Yeah. So it just kind of was time, you know. We had kind of ran its course. We were still writing some cool music, but we just kind of felt like we were just, you know, we were just done.
Yeah. Yeah, and were you like a fan of Shadows Fall before you joined the band? Were you like listening to Somber Eyes in the Sky?
Oh,
I'd be like, damn,
totally.
this is a good album.
Totally. And that's why we took them out a lot. I was psyched because we were, you know, Overcast was always on the metal side of the hardcore metal fence. You know, we always leaned pretty Slayerish. So and we loved At the Gates. So when I heard Somber Eyes, I was like, oh, there's a Massachusetts band who's doing like melodic death metal kind of influenced stuff, but still has breakdowns. And they had guitar solos. And I was like, man, we haven't heard guitar solos in forever. So I love that record. And we took them on a ton of shows. And live, it's funny. Like Matt and John were maniacs back then, jumping around, trying to like keep up with the hardcore band. So they were a band that we definitely were stoked on as it was. So when they came to me, I was not like wary of joining a band right away because like literally Overcast had just broken up, like, you know. So I was still kind of dealing with that. And then but then they played me a demo for Serenity. And I was like, oh, okay, if this is where like new songs are heading, I'm totally in. So
Yeah.
we started jamming pretty much a few weeks after the last Overcast show. We started jamming. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cool, like I guess the whole like Massachusetts like metalcore scene with like you guys and Unearth and Killswitch and Gage and all that remains. It feels like everybody knows each other. Same thing with like the Gothenburg band. It's like everybody is all like homies in the scene, like everybody knows each other. So what makes you all like know each other and be like homies and like sort of like be connected in a way?
Yeah, it's honestly it is similar to that because you know Massachusetts is physically a small state. So even if like a lot of the bands like the Shadows Fall guys are out in Western Massachusetts, and I was in the Boston area, but that's really still only like an hour and a half drive total. So when we would go out to shows out there, those guys would always be there, and when you know they would come into Boston to see shows, so you just kind of knew them from the scene, and the scene at that time was pretty small. So we're talking, we see these players where it's like Converge, Overcast, Shadows Fall, Cave In, all in the same bill, and you're like, yeah, there was like 75 people there. You know, like, it was small shows, even though they were like bands who would ultimately go on to get kind of big. We just kind of knew each other from around the way, and there weren't a ton of people playing that type of music, so you kind of gravitated together, you know. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's weird how many bands came out of a very small scene. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. And when you first joined up with Shadows Fall, were you kind of like nervous, like taking Phil's spot? Because as any time when bands change singers, there's always that thing of will it work or won't it work? But I think you pretty much filled in the shoes. You weren't trying to be Phil, but try to like do like your own thing.
Well, that was the thing. Phil killed it on Somber Eyes, and then went on to do amazing stuff with All That Remains as well. But so yeah, I was a little nervous about that because I kind of had to tell him, I'm like, I can't sing like that. Phil had a much more clean voice that like much more like thrashy and kind of dirty. He can hit some really high notes and really do that like much more melodic kind of stuff. So I was like, I'm gonna bring my own vibe to this. So hopefully, like you guys dig it, you know, because I wouldn't be able to sing like that. He also could do way deeper death metal stuff. I had more of a kind of like a hardcore scream. So yeah, it was going to be a big difference. So, but luckily when we started jamming, like things really worked out well where I think they were heading in a direction that suited my voice. So it all just kind of worked itself out. But yeah, you know, at first we didn't know how people were going to react to the new stuff. So of course, the first show I played with them, we opened with a brand new song and just played Serenity first, just to be like, whatever, you know, like
Yeah.
you got to deal with it now. Like here it is.
Yeah. And so tell me about Of One Blood. Definitely a great way, sort of like hit the ground running with your first record with the band. So what was the thought process going into making this album?
You know, well, the good thing about your first record is you kind of have a lot more time to write some of those songs because you know once you put out your first one, you got only a certain amount of time to get out the second one. So we really got to craft those songs for a while, and I think we knew when we wrote "Crushing Belial," we were like, this is going to be the kind of roadmap for everything this record is going to be about. You know, here's a little. That song is like kind of an epic that has a little bit of everything we do. in it, and it kind of set the groundwork. And Of One Blood was the song was another big shifting point where we were like, all right, we're not gonna be afraid to do some 80s metal influence like choruses, like that's just a big arena rock chorus. We wanted to let some of that rock shine through while still being, sounding like us and being metal. And so I think that was a big turning point. And then we also got to update some of the older songs like Fleshhold and do it more in my vocal style, as well as like To Ashes and things like that. And with To Ashes, me and Matt got to do a lot of harmonies the first time, and kind of started tinkering with that and using his voice versus my voice, which became a big signature of what we do. So yeah, I really think it was kind of like a great launching pad for all the kind of stuff we were going to do as it went. And to be able to team up with Century Media at the time was great, because they were putting out so much kind of like cutting edge influential metal. Like they had everything from like Chrisian doing super brutal stuff to Iced Earth doing the power metal, Arch Enemy and all that. So we were like, oh, this is the perfect place for us. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I also thought it was cool that you did like re-recordings of Fleshhold, Revel in My Loss, and To Ashes, which came from the first album. So,
mhm.
well, I guessing like I think it was like Century Media said you need like 3 extra songs. So what made you guys decide to do like re-recordings of those songs in particular?
Yeah, well, we always knew we wanted to do, like a full length album, and we had written, only so many new songs, but a lot of those songs on Somber hadn't gotten out in the world, and they didn't have me singing on them. So we figured we'd kind of, those ones we thought were the most akin to where we were heading as well. Some of the other songs, like a song like a Somber Angel, that's like a 8 minute long death metal, super technical thing. We were kind of getting a little bit away from that sound and heading more into the stuff that was like, Flesh Shoulder to Ashes. So it just made sense. And Rebel is just a sick song. So we just wanted to do that again just because it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what was like your first touring with the band, and how was like the fans sort of like reaction to like Shadow Fall with like the new guy singing?
Yeah, the first few things we did were kind of short runs up and down the eastern coast with like God Forbid and All Out War. And it was right when God Forbid were kind of just starting to get things going. They had just signed to Century Media as well. And that started kind of like a lifelong friendship with those guys, as well as honestly the All Out War guys who are still going at it these days too. And then from there, our first full US tour was the International Extreme Metal Tour. And it was Cataclysm from Canada, Dismember from Sweden, Christian from Brazil, and us. And man, we were without a doubt though the softest band of that bill. Like it was straight death metal bill, like so it was not intimidating, but we were like, all right, man, like we're gonna have to go out there and like earn it, because we got clean guitars and clean vocals. We're like, all right, there's gonna be some ballad moments that you all got to be ready for. So, but we didn't like shy away from it. We sort of leaned into that, and we are like, we're gonna sound different, but like we're gonna show you what we're all about. And it was a blast. We got along with all the bands super well, and it kind of gave us the touring bug where we're like, that's all we want to do. So right from there, the next tour was with Glassjaw, who were like almost like alternative metal. So we were like, more of a Deftones kind of vibe, but they're really their own thing. So that was a total different scene to play in front of. And then the tour after that was with King Diamond on the House of God tour. So we went right to traditional metal. So
Damn.
within one summer, we did death metal, kind of hardcore adjacent post-hardcore stuff, and then a traditional metal tour. So which we thought was perfect, because we thought Of One Blood fit in all those scenes in its own way. So
Yeah, because you're not just like a band's band. I feel like you can appeal to like any audience, and a way to like for like new audiences to hopefully gain new fans.
that was always our philosophy, man. We don't care what the show is. If we get in front of people, we're going to try and kick their ass. So that's all we cared about. And we felt like we could hang with anybody. So we just wanted to play anywhere. The weirder the bill or the like stranger the festival, usually the more fun it was. So especially in those days.
Yeah, you could play with like Nickelback or freaking Lady Gaga, and
Yeah,
everybody would
dude,
still love to
we've
come see
done
you.
yeah, we've done some of those radio festivals where we'll be in between like like 3 Days Grace and like another radio rock band, and we're just like, like sorry, it's about to just get a little bit heavier. So,
That's great.
but yeah, so, yeah, but we love that. Like we always wanted to play in front of anybody.
Yeah. And then going on to the next album, The Art of Balance, I thought this was a good follow-up to of One Blood. And I feel like that's sort of slowly when Shadows Fall was certainly become Shadows Fall. And did you feel like more comfortable with this album now that you started contributing more?
Yeah, no, this was the first one we wrote like as like the five of us. Like Jason was in the band. That was a huge part. That was the first major shift. Was the Knife was a great drummer, one of the best dudes ever, but he was never really a metal drummer, and we were getting like really metal, and it just wasn't working out. So, but we knew Jason from Stigmata and Crisis and a few other bands he'd played in, and he was like kind of the last piece. So once the five of us as that unit started writing songs for the Art of Balance, we felt like, all right, this is us. This is what we sound like, and that's also why it was even called the Art of Balance. Was like we wanted to show that we're trying to balance all these influences. We're trying to like show the light and the dark. We wanted to bring it all into focus. So yeah, and that was a huge like everything got bigger for when that record came out. You know, we started off like getting really good response and having some good like shows, but then before the end of the touring cycle, we're on Ozfest and we got a video on Bangers Ball, and things were, and all of a sudden we're selling 100,000 plus records on Century Media, which at the time they hadn't done yet. So it got crazy. That was the 2003 was the year that it just went like nuts. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's crazy. Like from this album, you pretty much had like the same lineup since that for now going on 20 plus years. So what
yep.
keeps you guys still like going and not like fight each other after 20 plus years?
I never said we didn't fight each other. So no, you learned that was one of the key things to being in a band that toured the way we were, is you all have to kind of be able to live out of each other's pockets. You know, like you're just in very close quarters. You got to be very single-minded in your approach to like we're out here to dominate and kick ass. And once we all got together, we knew that that was the mix. We needed all of us together to be Shadows Fall, which is why, you know, that we had a few different tours. We had a few fill-in people, but we've never lost core members, and now it's still the same five. You know, because all those times we had people fill in, it was either because people were either injured or sick or having a kid or something like that. You know, so but yeah, that's once the five of us got together, we knew that that was what Shadows Fall was all about.
Yeah, and one thing I liked on this, I know the last song is Welcome to the Machine, which is actually a Pink Floyd cover. So what made you guys to decide to like cover that song?
Yeah, you know, I think the initial idea is there was a cover compilation that we talked about, like, oh, hey, this label might do a Pink Floyd tribute, that never ended up happening, I don't think. So we were working on that and had a sick demo of it. And honestly, it came out so the demo was so good. We're like, what's the comps not happening? We're like, well, then we're putting it on the record, you know. And for us, it was just something to do that was totally different from everything else we'd done. And it's such a ambient, spacey song to be able to put it into like a straightforward chugging metal riff was just a lot of. So, and we never played it live though, which I always wanted to do. I think me and Matt would always get too lazy and never learn the harmonies. Plus, it's in a E standard tuning, which would be the only thing we would ever play in that tuning. So we'd have to bring a separate guitar just for it. So it just never happened. But I would love to one day. Hopefully we wouldn't butcher it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
There's
of
some
course,
high notes there. So
yeah. And then in between Art of Balance and The War Within, you did a little space rock project called Transient. So tell me about like that. Like I'm digging deep.
yeah, you know, that was something I was doing forever, really. Even right after Overcast broke up, me and this guy Timmy Hayes, who was in a bunch of Boston hardcore bands before that, started getting really into bands like Spiritualized and just more of that shoegazy, My Bloody Valentine type of stuff. And we wanted to just do a delay drenched, drony, spacey, weird band, and started writing songs together. And at first, I was playing drums pretty much exclusively, but then I started writing some stuff on guitar. And then when I was touring with Shadows Fall a ton, we found our friend. It's funny. It's actually he now plays bass for the Dropkick Murphys. Our
Oh,
friend Heavy
really?
Boy hopped on, hopped on drums, and so they could still play and jam when I was around. And when I was home, I would just come back and play as a second guitar player. And we started recording that way and playing more that way. So yeah, it was a blast. The last show we played was for we kind of got back together and did a show for my friend's 40th birthday a while back, but that's really been it. We recorded so much stuff that no one ever heard, like, you know, tons of like just Pro Tools demos from the practice space and all that stuff. I probably have full hard drives full of weird transient stuff. But also sometimes they weren't even songs; they were us just hitting every pedal and seeing what would happen for like 10 minutes. So
Yeah, yeah. And do you think those songs will ever see the light of day?
maybe half of them I'd have to figure out where they even are.
Yeah,
But maybe one day I'll just do a mega like Bandcamp dump, and just like put up all
yeah,
this
just
shit
like
one day.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Here's everything. Here's like 40 hours of just nonsense.
yeah. And do you feel like with playing guitar and then drums, do you feel like you're able to like express like yourself, like have like a different side of you, like creatively, as opposed to when you do vocals?
Oh, totally. And I'm not very good at either of those things. I'm self-taught on both, and like don't have a whole lot of musical knowledge when it comes to those instruments. But I have a blast. So I play drums not every day, but a lot, and I play guitar every day, even if it's just acoustic, just strumming some chords on the couch. I try and play every day, and annoy my kids by singing stupid songs at them or doing weird Grateful Dead covers that they don't understand.
Yeah. And then we get to The War Within. I love this album. So what was that like making this album? Because I know you're about to celebrate the 20-year anniversary next year.
Yeah, man, 20 years. Dude, 20 years. It's insane.
Yeah. I was in fourth
Yeah,
grade when this came out.
that's awesome. Yeah, that record, there was definitely the first time we had like kind of like pressure, whereas, we were coming off of 150,000 copies on an indie label, a lot of exposure on Ozfest and things like that. So there was expectations for the first time of like, oh, I wonder if they can do that again, or if it was, fluke or whatever. So we thankfully were very like kind of insulated, where we just sort of weren't listening to any new music. We were like just focused on what we were doing, and we wanted to make a record that really pushed all of our influences, but not by like kind of cutting and pasting them together, like really trying to create some new sounds out of like what we were listening to. And it's weird, we were oddly inspired by the Down 2 record, because it felt like they just did whatever they wanted, but it all sounded like Down on that record. They're like, oh, we want to do an Allman Brothers tune, we're going to do it, but it all made sense. And we wanted to make a record that kind of had that cohesive feel. And yeah, so we just really tried to push ourselves to, playing wise and songwriting wise as far as we could. And really proud of how that record came out. Sonically, Zeus did an incredible job, where it just sounds right out of the gates, those clean classical at the beginning just sound huge. And when everything kicks in up that like reverse reverb right into the sweep picking, it's just like everything is just like poof. And we were like, that's what we always wanted to hear. That was the sound we'd always had in our head. So we were stoked to get that, which is why honestly we opened the record with The Light That Blinds, because again we were like, here's like a synopsis of everything that's going to come in the next 40 minutes is like right in this like 6-minute song. So
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, this album is almost 20 years old, and I don't know what was going on in 2004, but I feel like that whole new wave of American metal scene, like every band that had an album out in '04, from this to End of Heartache to The Oncoming Storm to The Curse
yep.
by Atreyu, I feel like everybody like '04 was like a good year for like metal music.
Oh yeah, it was when it was really, because the new wave of American heavy metal, as they called it, was kind of starting to kick off a few years before that. But by 2004, it was taking over, where the Ozfest 2003 was a lot of bands like us and Chimera and Killswitch, but it was also a ton of new metal bands that had like, hit that third tier of new metal, and it was starting to kind of die out. And bands like us were kind of taking over, and that was a sign. And then by 2004, 2005, you looked at Ozfest second stage, and it was all metalcore or like melodic death metal or like hardcore bands. Like we had kind of made our presence felt, and yeah, like you said, like there's so many classic records that came out around that time, whether it was 2004, 2005. There's so many bangers. It's crazy.
See, yeah, yeah, and like you said, you're gonna do a special thing next year with this album, like playing it in full. So, what songs are you looking forward to playing live that I haven't played in years?
Yeah, there's a few we haven't played in a long time, but the one that's craziest, Stillness, I think we might have only played a handful of times ever. We did play it at a few Ozfest 2005 shows, I remember, but that one's really gotten played, so that'll be special. But then some other the deeper cuts, like For Those Who Cannot Speak and Act of Contrition, like we played those, but it's been a while, so I'm psyched to play those. and Eternity Within's another one we don't play a ton, but that one will be getting busted out. It's going to be crazy to kind of play it all those songs. We've started kind of working on it now. I don't know. We still don't know if we're going to play it straight through or if we want to split it up or what we want to do. But it would be fun to play it straight through just to be like, wow, that's the whole record, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping you do like more dates. I'd love to see you like come to Atlanta and play this in full. I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I would love to. We unfortunately our schedules are tough to kind of get all together between Jason playing in Anthrax and I mean, sorry, Jason playing in Overkill and John playing in Anthrax. It's been tough to kind of tour full time. Plus, I got 2 kids and a full time job. Same with Paul, so it's tough to do touring. But we definitely want to hopefully maybe add at least a couple more within shows before the end of the year. But we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Try to like get like the stars aligned.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
psyched for the New Jersey show's gonna be fun, and it's a great bill too. We got Fit for an Autopsy joining us, and Nora, who's coming out of retirement, and Alluvial, who I got to do an awesome Pantera cover with their guitar player for Metal Injection. That was fun. So that it's gonna be a
Nice.
killer bill, and it should be a great time, man. I'm psyched.
Yeah. Yeah. And then kind of going into the next album, Threads of Life. I love this album. Probably like my favorite album of Shadows Fall. So what was it like making
Oh,
this
cool.
album?
That was a much different experience for us. The War Within had really done well, so we had all the major labels sniffing around, and that part was real fun to like, get to like get wined and dined and all that stuff. And when we first signed with Atlantic Records, it seemed like the best place to be. Like we signed a super band friendly deal. They were really supporting us. And then like every other mid-label story, everyone that signed us got fired. Like they were all gone before the record came out. So we went out to California with a bigger budget than we'd ever had. So we recorded at Dave Grohl's studio at Studio 606, which was absolutely amazing. Seeing all of like the Foo Fighters gear and then old vintage Nirvana stuff there and all the platinum records. It was like pretty overwhelmingly cool. And Dave was amazing. The producer Nick Raskulinecz has done some incredible records too. So we were really excited to go out and like first time we'd ever left home to like record a record. We went out and lived out there and just lived this record. That was all we were doing, is just in the studio or in our little apartments, like writing together. So it was a blast. And but when it came out, unfortunately, we didn't have the real team behind us at the label anymore, so it didn't really get much of a push. So it did well, but it's one of those like what ifs to us. Like we're like, what if we would have had a kind of better team behind us? What if we would have done a few things different? But all history now. I love a lot of the songs on that record though, so I think we made an amazing record. It just unfortunately didn't hit that next level of like a major label band. So, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, like Redemption, Venomous, Final Call, The Great Collapse.
Yep.
Like all these songs could be like hits. Like I feel like every song is a
Yeah.
hit.
Awesome. It's funny. My favorite's the heaviest song on the record. Failure of the Devout is probably my favorite because it's just such a brutal song for us, and we did it on our major label record.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in between that and Retribution, I know you briefly got back together with Overcast. So what made you guys decide to like get back together for that occasion?
Yeah, well, it was honestly we got lucky where people were really into Killswitch Engage, people were really into Shadows Fall, so that brought interest back to Overcast, and people started listening to old records. And we'd always wanted to record them in a way that sounded like better, and that gave us a chance to re-record some songs and also record some songs that we had written before we broke up that we never got to do. So that ended up being Reborn to Kill Again album on Metal
Yeah.
Blade, and that was a blast. We got to record with Adam D, so that was fun.
Yeah, I thought that was a good I thought that was a good album. You like make those songs sort of like more refined,
Yeah,
fine
totally. And
with like
we were all
today's
better
technology.
musicians. We were all a little bit older. Yeah, exactly. We just had a better production, which some of the OG fans probably were like, "Oh, I like the raw sounds of the young ones," which I get. But we just wanted to hear those songs in a different way, and we were playing shows again occasionally, so we figured why not record. So yeah, that was a blast. But yeah, and we still may pop up and do some Overcast shows here and there. Those are like when a random festival will give us an offer, and all of a sudden we are all like, everyone's free, and we're like, all right, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then tell me about making Retribution. I thought this was a pretty good album. What was the thought process going into making that album? And did you feel like pressure to follow up Threads of Life?
We wanted to make just a really aggressive record on that one. So we went and we did all the instrumental work at Planet Z with Zeus again, but then we went down to Virginia and recorded with this dude Mike Bisquette. Did the vocals down there, and that was a blast. It was just me, Matt, and John locked in this little beach house, just recording vocals for like a week, which is something we never had the time or kind of like approach to do before, and that was fun. So for me, Retribution's up there with like some of my favorite stuff because I really got to focus on doing some different stuff vocally and all that. So yeah, that one was fun. And a lot of those songs, like we still play My Demise and King of Nothing and a lot of those songs live too. So I love that record.
Yeah, I love like My Demise. I feel like that song has like good variations. I also love the breakdown and the lyrics that are just really great. And the acoustic part that comes up in the middle adds a lot more kind of like depth and more atmosphere to that song.
There's a lot going on in that song. Yeah, it goes from like that sludgy, heavy stuff and then all of a sudden it's neoclassical shred out of nowhere, like, and then a big breakdown,
Yeah. And
Yep.
then
So
then the most recent Shadows Fall album, Fire from the Sky. I loved this album. This was definitely one of my favorite albums from 2012. So what was the thought process making this?
well, we were gonna record with Adam D for the first time, which as a life, like we've known that dude forever, and such a fan of his production, and he's such a funny guy to work with that recording it was a blast. I basically lived in Adam's extra room at his house for like a while, and just had so much fun working on that record with him. And yeah, man, it's a killer record. The title track might be the heaviest thing we've ever done. And that's straight out of Matt's just death metal riff pool that he has. So yeah, that record was a blast. I also Weight of the World's another favorite of mine. I love how the intro is just like immediate drum fills, guitar shred, and blast beats, and it's just like here's every single note possible just coming at your face like a bunch of electrified bees or some shit.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, we didn't know at the time it was going to be the last like record which we're working on some stuff now, but but if at the time once we did stop touring, I was like, all right, man, that's a good like exclamation point to go out on.
Hell yeah. And I guess like after that you did a Death Ray Vision with Mike D. So how'd you two sort of like make that project?
Yeah, he was working on some riffs and had some stuff going on and was just like, we know each other so well through the years that he's like, oh man, I think this stuff would be perfect. And we didn't want to write Overcast Part 2. It's definitely way more like thrashy old school hardcore. And it was fun, man. I moved away at that time. I moved from Boston to St. Louis, so I ended up not being able to kind of focus on that band the way I would have been able to if I'd lived there. So that's why they ended up finding a couple other singers after me because they just wanted to still play shows around New England, and I lived 15 hours away by car, so it was a tough commute. But I love the first 7-inch and the full length I did with those guys was a blast. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love those songs.
Yeah,
So
and this year does mark 10 years of We Ain't Leaving Until You're Bleeding. Been
that's
a hell of a tongue
crazy.
twister title. So
That
how do you feel about that album
yeah.
now 10 years later?
I can't even believe it's 10 years. That's insane. I love that record, man. I love the title too because we were the least tough band ever. So we were like, oh, we got to just make the most ignorantly tough like album title. So it was perfect. There was a lot of tongue in cheek with Death Ray. Like we took the music seriously, but like we tried to have some fun with just the imagery and the lyrics and some of the titles and stuff like that. There's literally a song called Chainsaw of Bees, so
Yeah, you just wanted to have like a fun time.
yeah, it was just it was like good friends making music together for fun. We never really had much of an agenda, and knew we weren't going to really do a ton of touring or anything like that. So yeah, it was really just for fun.
Yeah, and then tell me about because I know that same year you also did Metal All Stars. Tell me about like that.
That tour was crazy town. It was a lot of fun. It was insane. So yeah, it was a tour around Europe with myself and Matt and John from Shadows Fall, but then also like Joey Belladonna, Zach Wild, who else was out there? Ross the Boss was with us. It was all over the place, man. It was Udo from Accept. And we would kind of have like a different rotating band of like, it was like Aaron Rossi was on drums for some stuff and he was in like Ministry and Prong and a bunch of other bands. And then, so it would kind of rotate. Jason Todd from Shinedown was there, and Maylene and the Sons of Disasters. Awesome dude, sick guitar player. So it was a ton of awesome musicians just doing a few of your own songs, like as the singers, we do your own, and then we do some covers. So it was cool. Got to do Bark at the Moon with Blasco, who's Ozzy's bass player on bass, so that was cool. But yeah, it was a train wreck of a tour as far as it was like put on by some sketchy people who I think the main promoter actually might even be in jail at this time. But it was a
Oh
lot of fun
shit.
for everyone else. Yeah, but it was crazy. So it was crazy.
Yeah, and then I know you also did Hell Night, which is of course a St. Louis hardcore band. So
Yep.
how'd you form Hell Night?
They were actually they were one of the first bands I saw when I moved here. My wife was friends with the original singer, this dude Mike, and they blew my mind. They were like had the energy and chaos of like Black Flag or Circle Jerks, but it had like riffs that were more like Deep Purple or like Joe Jackson even, and a crazy guitar sound. And then Mike actually just wasn't able to really do the band anymore, didn't really want to, so he stepped down, and they asked me to pop in, and man, I was stoked. So we started writing stuff right out of the gates. We're still doing things occasionally. We got like 4 or 5 new tunes we want to record at some point, but yeah, that's been fun. Way different than anything I'd done before. So it was cool to kind of branch out and make some just really noisy, weird shit.
Yeah, yeah, because I like that. I was doing like my research before the interview. I listened to the first album, Human Shells. I thought that was a pretty good
Yeah,
album too.
yeah. Man, it's just we just wanted to make dirgy, big, weird sounding stuff.
Yeah, and then 2017 you did like two things, Hell Night songs and Cancer Size. Like I
Yep.
guessing you guys have like so much you write a lot, you just like decide to put like two things in one year.
Yeah, we record stuff pretty shortly after we write it. We don't even give it a lot of time to kind of sit. It's way more immediate. We just want to like get the idea figured out and record it and then just put it out. And yeah, so we've put out, a couple full lengths, couple 7 inches, couple demo tapes, couple stuff that's just online. So yeah, like, and that's again, no, we never have any like business plan. We just like record stuff and just put it out for fun.
Yeah. And then of course like the last thing is you did like a Downpour or with Derek Schwill,
Yep.
Matt LeBrighton and Peter Giles. So how did you just form that band?
That was Derek, who had played in Unearth, and he was actually in Shadows Fall for a minute before Jason joined the band. He helped us out and did a Japanese tour and a few other things for us. So I've known Derek forever, and he had these songs that him and Matt LeBreton had written, and I loved it. It had like a, Pantera meets Tool meets just Opeth type of feel, but it was like very different than anything I'd kind of heard recently, and I started writing to it pretty quickly. So I didn't really plan on being in that band. I kind of was like, I got so much stuff going on, and then the songs were so good, and it flowed real quick. We unfortunately got kind of derailed where everyone got really busy, so we put out the CD at one point, but it wasn't even all the songs, and we keep talking about putting it out on digital, but it's just everyone kind of lives went separate ways. So it was a bummer that we really recorded some stuff that was probably the most varied singing I've ever done. Definitely some of the most melodic singing I've ever done. So it was a lot of fun, but unfortunately we never kind of got to really follow through on it. So maybe one day, but doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then kind of switching topics, so I want to talk about like your lyric writing, depending on like your bands, because I know Shadows Fall talks about like inner struggles, society, but then you go into Overcast, which talks about like anger and rebellion, and then Death Ray Vision, like you mentioned, that first album was more kind of like fun. So do you have to like put yourself in a certain frame when come up with lyrics, or did it just come like naturally and organically?
Yeah, it is sort of natural, but yeah, each set of material definitely I get into a different vibe though. Like, I know when I'm writing stuff if it would fit into the Shadows Fall world. But a lot of times the music itself inspires the topic. If something's like really aggressive, like it'll just, it'll have a little more of that in it. But yeah, and Shadows Fall, like especially I would never want to do something silly in Shadows Fall because we've just never had that vibe. It just wouldn't fit. But I also to do something like a horror movie type of thing wouldn't fit either. It was just never our kind of thing. It was very personal lyrics. And with the Overcast stuff, Mike D wrote a lot of the early songs, so that just sort of set the tone. And he was an angry man when he started writing those songs. So so I just followed his lead. But yeah, it was a good outlet to kind of express some of that stuff. because it's funny, at the time of being in Overcast, I was a total deadhead hippie kid too. You know, like I spent way more time on Fish Tour than at hardcore shows. So it was funny to then write the angriest, craziest stuff in my spare time, you know.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, so and then with Death Ray, they were just, I was like, man, I get to do something totally different. It wasn't Shadows Fall. So I was like, oh, I want to write a lot more straightforward, but like a lot more like kind of storytelling ish and like have some fun with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I saw was interesting. Like you also studied literature at university. Did that sort of like at all help your lyric writing?
I'm sure it did because yeah, I used to I absorbed a lot. I read a ton. Like I was, yeah, as a literature major, you just physically have to read a ton. But I just, even in my spare time, I was just absorbing so much. I was studying a lot of philosophy as well, so all that sort of seeped out in the lyrics. I can tell who I was reading or what I was reading, or at least the sort of philosophical slant of what I was into based on the lyrics from certain records. So like the art of balance, I was really into studying like a lot about Buddhism and transcendental meditation, and I was really searching for like some higher plane stuff. And then with the War Within, I was reading a lot of like Bukowski and like Tim Robbins and stuff like that, and it was way more like inner turmoil, like psycho stuff, you know. So it's funny. You can definitely follow the arc of what I was into at the time through the lyrics.
Yeah. And then I know
Which
back
at the time I didn't notice, but like looking back, I can see it now. You know.
yeah, but then I know back in 2021 you and the Shadows Fall boys got back together and did like your first reunion show in Massachusetts. So what made you guys decide to get back together?
You know, we'd wanted to play shows again for a while, and we just wanted the time to be right. And you know, once the pandemic kind of hit, we sort of realized like, all right, oops, shit.
Ooh.
We kind of realized like, we we got to, you know, let's why are we waiting around? It's the time. So we were lucky able to kind of get everyone's schedules together, and it was incredible. Like as soon as we started jamming together again, it just felt fun. It felt right. So the shows were a blast. We really rehearsed like crazy for it, and we're probably better prepared for that than anything we'd ever been for before that. And also realized like, man, we should have been practicing more when we were together. Because like
Yeah.
we used to not we used to hate practicing. So we're like, and we always were like, we tore enough, we don't need to. And then after we practiced a bunch, we're like, all right, maybe we really should have.
Yeah.
But then also when we started practicing, we figured, well, if we have ideas, why not write new music as well? You know, so if we're gonna get together, like let's see what we got. So that started leading to some new stuff. So looking forward to seeing where it heads.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure to finally see Shadows Fall last year. You played the Furnace Fest in Birmingham, Alabama, and I actually was there. And one thing I love is love about you guys is like, especially you, is like you actually give a shit about your fans, because I know like right after your set you actually jumped down in front of the barricade and like meet the fans, and I even got a selfie with you there. So
Nice.
how important is like the fans to you?
Well, I, you know, grew up in the hardcore scene where there was very little separation between the bands and the audience. So that's always been the way I approach it. And also, when I go to a show, I hang out with the guys in my band all the time. I want to go hang out with like other people and meet other people and like, you know,
Yeah.
experience different cities. So it's huge to me. And we wouldn't get to do what we do. We've been so blessed and done way more than we ever thought we would. You know, we've traveled places I never in a million years thought I'd get. So we appreciate every bit of that. So, and that's wouldn't exist without people who, so yeah, man, I'm always about it. And I love stage diving in the crowd. I like getting down there, letting people sing along. It also makes my job easier if, you know, let you guys sing. So yeah, I'll always, that'll always be a part of a Shadows Fall show.
Yeah. And then I know you mentioned earlier like you started working on new music. So what is like the status for the new Shadows Fall album, if you're allowed to say?
Yeah, we don't have any sort of schedules or any plans that way yet. We're just in full scale writing mode. I'd say we've got six real solid songs that, you know, maybe aren't finished yet, but are getting there. And then two or three other ones that are in the skeleton stage. So I don't know if we're going to release it as a full length. I don't know if we'll release, you know, like a few songs here and there. That's the beauty of not being on a record label or any of that stuff at the time. And right now is we can really kind of think of the best way to do things. It's so different now, you know, like you could just release a few songs on an EP and then put it all out in vinyl 8 months later, you know, like whatever. We have no idea. But the material's sick. Like this is some, it's very Shadows Fall. It's definitely on the heavier side of Shadows Fall so far. I don't know if there'll be some other stuff coming down the line, but I'm loving it, man. These dudes came to play. So, and I've been working on vocal demos now, so I'm trying to get everything figured out. We want to like really make these songs the best we can, seeing as there's no time, there's no uh time, you know. So we're able to kind of take our time. So we're making the most of that.
Right, right. Do you think it's going to continue in sort of like the same vein as Fire in the Sky, or being as it has been over a decade, it's almost kind of like a new beginning for Shadows Fall in a way?
It sounds like if you heard these songs, you'd be like, oh, that's Shadows Fall, but no, it doesn't sound like like it's different. It definitely sounds different.
Yeah.
So yep.
Yeah, and so kind of like in the end to wrap things up, what's next for y'all? I know you got those War Within 20-year anniversary shows coming up. Is just anything else that you want to plug?
Yeah, we got the new, yeah, in March, the New Jersey show. That's gonna be amazing. We're doing Welcome to Rockville in Jacksonville. We just found out we Anthrax was playing on Thursday, so we got moved to Thursday. We were originally gonna play Sunday, but we couldn't work the schedules out, which I'm glad, because now we play right in between Biohazard and Machine Head, so it's perfect. So we'll be there Thursday. Judas Priest headlining. It's gonna be amazing. And then from there, I hopefully will have some other show in either the fall or winter, but we still working out some details, and we're going to be working on new music. So yeah, so you can follow our Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff, and we'll have updates. We're always sneaking a few little pieces of riffs out there every now and then too, so you get to hear a tiny little tease of some new shit.
Awesome. So thank you, Brian, for this conversation. It was great to be able to chat with you today. Is just any final words you want to say to the viewers that are watching this to close this out?
No, man, just thanks for the, almost 30 years of support in this band. It's crazy that The War Within is going to turn 20. It's almost going to be legally able to drink, it's nuts. So we really appreciate it. And glad that we're able to continue to, play some shows and make some music, because man, it's what we love to do.
Yeah. So everybody, Brian Fair from Shadows, goddamn motherfucking Fall. See you next time.